along the way, also knowing that the session will be recorded. So it's a great pleasure for me to welcome you all at this first session of our AI Tech and Policy Talks, AITPT, since the beginning of the year. AITPT is an initiative of our Digital Law Center that has a mission to discuss and present cutting-edge AI tech and policy issues and to foster an interdisciplinary dialogue about these issues. And today we are extremely privileged to welcome our keynote and guest speaker, Professor Lonneke van der Plas. Welcome, Lonneke, who is leading the Computation, Cognition and Language Group at the Idiap Institute. Idiap is a globally leading research institute specialized on AI, which is located in Switzerland in the city of Martigny, close to the Swiss Alps, which we don't see in your background, hopefully for the next opportunity. Beyond the pleasure of welcoming you, Lonneke, it's also a great pleasure for us at the Digital Law Center also to have this concrete opportunity also to work together with the Idiap, with which we've had already initiated contacts and interactions in the past. And Lonneke will make a presentation on the most fascinating topic of computational creativity, and she will present some of her recent work on the generation of novel concepts. So we're very much looking forward to this. And as usual for our AITPT sessions, the presentation by our speaker will be followed by comments made on the presentation by two distinguished commentators. And today it's a great pleasure for us to welcome Dr. Andres Guadamuz, who is a reader in IP law at the University of Sussex, as well as our own, so to say, Ana Andrijevic, who is a Ph.D. candidate and also a research and teaching assistant at our Digital Law Center and works on the topic for her Ph.D. of copyright and artificial intelligence. And will then open the floor for discussion with our speaker and our commentators. Please note that the session is recorded, as you should see at the top of the screen, so that we can make it available on our Digital Law Center website. And without further ado, let me wish you all a very stimulating AITPT session, and let me now give the virtual floor to Professor Lonneke van der Plas for her presentation.
Yes, thank you very much. I will again share my screen. Yes, here are the slides. So do you see the slides
Perfect.
right now? Okay, great. So yes, it's a great pleasure for me to be here. Thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm very happy indeed that we've started some collaborations between Digital Law Center in Geneva and Idiap Research Center. I think that there are two ways in which I think this is a very fruitful, could be a very fruitful collaboration. On the one hand, because the types of data that you're working on in law are very interesting for us to work on. There's a lot of text involved, and since I'm working on AI, but especially on a textual basis, I'm very interested in that. But not only that, I think it's also very nice to, which will be more the topic of today's talk, like talk together about all the emerging technology in AI and what kind of interesting things there are to discuss in relation to law. I think that both these things are very interesting. So yes, today I'm going to talk about some recent work that I've done on creating novel concepts. And this is really a topic in computational creativity. And I hope we can have some discussions afterwards for the implications for law. So this is work in collaboration with Inga Lang, who's my current intern, and Pradeep Dar, who's a PhD student from the University of Groningen, whom I've worked with a lot in the past. So yeah, thanks for the introduction. I don't need to say this anymore, maybe. I'm an AI researcher. My name is Lonneke van der Plas. I'm specialized in language-related AI, and it's also called natural language processing. Maybe some of you have heard about that. I'm currently leading the Computation, Cognition and Language group in Martigny, but I've also been a postdoc once a long time ago at the University of Geneva, so I know Geneva very well, and I really like the city. So Idiap, what's Idiap? We're an independent not-for-profit research foundation and created quite a while ago already. And the nice thing about us is that we have R&D engineers as well as researchers. And so we're kind of trying to bridge the gap between industry and academia. We also have a master in artificial intelligence, which is special because it's business integrated. And I think it's unique in its type. So yes, we have been growing a lot over the recent years. So currently we have about 150 employees, 65 research projects always active, and 120 publications per year. We have these 14 research groups, of which one is mine. And our expertise ranges from signal processing to speech and language processing, data science. We work on different types of data types, text, speech, audio, images, and we have lots of different application domains, as you can see. So my group is the Computation, Cognition and Language group, and what I'm currently focusing on are two things. One is the fact that I think that language technology, as it is right now, is going very well. We're creating a lot of interesting tools, but unfortunately, these are often available for English mostly. And as soon as you go to other languages, or even for languages that are lower resourced, we don't find this language technology. And I think that is not really a fair way to distribute technology over the world. So I'm trying to create language technology tools for languages that might have fewer resources. But I'm not going to talk about that today. Today we're going to talk about creativity, and that's part of my second research topic, which is about seeing where the boundaries of current AI are. Well, it's called artificial intelligence, but how intelligent are these systems really when we compare that to human cognitive abilities? And one thing that I think is really underexposed in the research in AI is that of creativity. And this is what this talk will be about. So why did I start working on computational creativity? Well, it wasn't so much because I like to create novel artworks or something like that. I was seeing that if you look at the AI currently, where it's going, we're creating bigger and bigger models based on bigger and bigger amounts of data. And although we have impressive results in several tasks, there's still limitations. And you might not see that maybe as an outsider of the field. You probably all see all of these bit hyped up talks about AI. I mean, they're getting as intelligent as humans, and we're going to soon be all non-important anymore because AI is going to solve it all. But when you are working in the AI field yourself, you see that actually there's a lot of researchers trying to see where are the limitations, where are still the things that these AI systems cannot do. So some of the limitations that have been discussed are that these systems are often brittle. They still get confused by small changes in the data, for example. So they make mistakes. They're very data hungry. As I said, they need large amounts of data, but they really need it. Without that, they can't do anything really well. And this is, of course, bad for environment, right? So imagine having to train these models. It takes as much energy as flying around the world or something like that to create these big models. Also, the systems are often very good at something, and people might show these results of, look how well the system performs on this, but it means it's only very good at that particular task it's been trained on. Whereas humans, I mean, if I learned today how to play tennis, I probably can use some of the things that I've learned for playing badminton, for example, right? But these systems are very hard. I find it very hard to go from one domain or from one task to another. They are not so so flexible in their learning. So, and the other thing is they can't really explain things to us at the moment, right? So people are trying to find out what these models learn, but they're pretty much like what we call black boxes. So they do a task very well, but how and why, we don't really know. And that means we also can't control very much what they're doing. So yeah, all in all, they lack a lot of aspects of human intelligence. And this is why I thought, creativity is one of those aspects that I would like to work on. So these are some of the threats that some people have noticed, and this is related to limitations like brittleness. I've already talked about it. How trustworthy are systems? Data hungriness. How much data do they need, and is that good for environment? Can we really all be training all these systems all the time? Bias is another thing, right? Because they use a lot of data, and we can't really afford to curate the data very well because it's so much. They often get all of the different biases that we find in the data also in these models. So you get problems with gender bias, or there might be discriminative content in these models. So yeah, pretty big problems there. Also, they can't explain things, as I said, which is a problem if you're creating a system that helps doctors to decide how to deal with a patient, for example, or maybe in law. Yeah, why does make such certain decisions are made? You want to know what the system used to be able to come to a certain conclusion, and if you can't have that, well, then the system is in a way a bit, not to be trusted, right? But the one thing that I was focusing most on, and I think it was really not discussed much, is the narrowness of these models. And let's look a little bit more about that. So this is something that I've been discussing while I was at the University of Zurich a few years ago already, where I was a DSI fellow. I talked to a philosopher, and we together we looked at this narrowness of systems, and we said, if you look at society and the way processes are run in society, if you think, for example, of market dynamics, but also if you look at natural evolution, there's a lot of diversity in these processes, and this diversity is the reason for innovation. This is why we are able to adapt to certain situations. So, for example, natural evolution, there are some harmful mutations, but they are needed for us to adapt to the situation and to be able to overcome certain difficulties. Now, if you think of a society where we're going to train lots of intelligent systems to make decisions for us, you can imagine that could be a problem, because these systems are trained not to make mistakes. So they are kind of trained on a very narrow defined objective function. They're just saying, don't make mistakes. This is the data we've seen previously. This is what you have to try to make decisions on so that you don't make mistakes. But these functions will be very limited. They will not exhibit the same exploration power as a natural system where there's lots of humans and one human says, well, I know this is maybe wrong, but I have a gut feeling that this time I'm going to go for this. And maybe that's good, maybe that's bad, but at least we can see a little bit more of the search space, whereas these narrow defined systems will just go for the least risky solution all the time. And also, previously things are done by many humans, many minds, but if we have all these intelligent agents, I mean, there will be more decisions taken over by fewer agents. So again, less diversity. And if you imagine that these systems need to be trained on data, and they're going to be kind of also have an effect on the data because they're going to affect what decisions we make, this is going to be more and more impoverished over time. So we see really some threats in there for also related to maybe what you've heard about filter bubbles, people being exposed to the same kind of information all the time, because recommender systems have the same idea in mind. We don't want to make mistakes. We want people to be happy immediately with what we're giving them, for example, YouTube videos or something like that, which results in people seeing more and more of the same and getting really locked up in their own ideas without seeing the world around them. And also bias, for example, in automatic candidate selection. Imagine for hiring people, going through their CVs and always thinking, oh, well, I should go for the most safest option and always select this kind of profile, which will create a lack of diversity in your workforce. So yes, this is why I thought we should be working on creativity. So maybe that's a whole different way than you would have imagined how I came to this topic. So computational creativity is a recent field, but it's really picking up. I think it's kind of getting more and more attention. There is a dedicated community, and there's an annual conference, the ICC. And also, I think that for how much people work on it, there's actually a lot of attention from the public. There's a lot of, you see often things, for example, the next Rembrandt. There was this also kind of, a lot of people have heard about this, that the AI system was able to predict what would be the next Rembrandt, right? What, based on all the paintings that he has made, what would be a next painting. There are screenwriting tools based on big language models, and people have even tried to create real videos or movies out of these automatically written screens, scripts for movies. And then there was Davos also, which was and the related patent application for this AI generated invention, which caught also a lot of attention, I think. So the forecast for computational creativity is also very good. If you look at what how they think the market size will grow, that looks quite promising. Strangely enough, it's not that much studied, actually. If you look at NLP, the conferences that I go to, there's not a lot of computational creativity. And I think the reason for that is that it's very hard to evaluate creative output. You can imagine, like, even if somebody creates a painting, right? Do you like it? You don't like it? Is it innovative enough? Well, how about originality? All of these things, it's very hard to evaluate. Whereas other topics in my field, where you just have to find the right, put the right label on a certain entity. For example, the Digital Law Center is an organization, something like that, and Lonneke van der Plas is a person. There you have clear rights and wrongs, and it's easier to evaluate. So I guess it's because of that. But I still want to work on this, so I'll take the challenge of evaluating it. And I'll show you later also how hard it is to evaluate. So the topic that I've chosen for computational creativity when I started out with this is novel concept creation, because I thought it's a kind of quite a simple way of dealing with creativity in a linguistic context, because you just have words that you put together to create new ideas. And if you look at how humans do that, you can see also that there might be something that a computer can do there. There's some clear patterns that it could pick up on if it looked at enough data. So I have an example here for laminated wood. So laminated wood was something that was already used by the ancient Egyptians, and it was patented in 1865. Now, laminated wood was a success because it was affordable, because you could put small pieces of wood together. It made it flexible and also strong. Now, something similar to wood is glass. It's also a material and it's fragile. So, you know, it would maybe be good to actually also do a similar process with glass. And indeed, laminated glass was also invented a little bit later, patented in 1909. And if you look at this pattern, you can see that, you know, you just have an existing combination, and you see that wood and glass have something in common, and therefore you could infer that this might be a promising new concept. So we've taken this this strategy of or kind of the patterns that we see in corpora and try to create a model out of that. What's nice about these novel concepts is that we can also trace them, because we have corpora across time. So we have, for example, the Google corpus, the books corpus. It is timestamped, so you can see when certain terms become popular and when they get less popular. For example, here for laminated glass, you see that laminated wood was quite popular in 1920s, and then afterward laminated glass came into existence, and it was a big success, and maybe bigger than laminated wood, as you can see. And the other example that I have here on the right is the one for mobile phone. And I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, so mobile phone, mobile radios were there for a long time, not very often mentioned. So this is just frequencies in the corpus. But the mobile phone really picked up after the 2000s, as you can see here, as being mentioned a lot in text. So yeah, we thought, why don't we take compounds? Compounds are the formation of new words by using two words and putting them together. It's a very productive word formation process. I've put some examples on top from a recent experience that I had when the last traveling I did, where I ended up in a quarantine hotel, so it wasn't very great, but okay. You see a lot of compounds there. We use them all the time, and people are very good at coming up with new compounds. If you look at the new words in dictionaries, like you have every year that they come up with these lists of new words, there are often a lot of compounds there. Children come up with compounds on the fly. My son had, that was the example I had, like for the small cheeselets, that Baby Bell, he used the word cheese moons, for example. Yeah, he probably thought of the shape and the color and came up with this word. So it's very flexible. The relation between the lexemes is not specified, which I show here. So leather jacket, leather scissors looks the same. You're putting leather together with something else. But if you look at the relation, it's very different. A jacket made of leather or scissors used to cut leather. Same for kitchen knife and cheese knife. The relation between the two is very different, but you can just glue the things together, and people have to come up with, you know, from their own world knowledge what the relation is. And you see that the translation in another language then can also be very different. In French, where you have to specify the preposition for these complex nominals. So yeah, compounds to us seemed like ideal vehicles for creative thought. They allow us to do combination of things that are known, put them together, create something new. They're very flexible, and that could be ideal then. So we created this system, and we used a timestamped corpus. So in our case, we use the COCA corpus, and this is from the 1990s till the 2019. And we said, let's pretend that we are in 2014. Yeah, we know we have data for after that, but let's pretend we're in 2014 and create a model based on all the data that we've seen previously to predict what will come after the 2014s. So what did we do with that data? So we took these large amounts of texts, and we first created a model that would tell us how similar words are. So you, for example, it would, we use the statistics and I'm not going into the details, but statistics between words tell us how similar words are. So it will know that coffee and tea are very similar, Water is a little bit less similar than these two, but then something like table or chair is completely different from these terms, right? So it will have a notion of similarity. Also, we have the trends. We know which words are becoming trendy and which ones are really declining in their popularity. So these are the representations that we build for our single words. Then we want to have a model also for the combination of the two. So we use the development set for that, from the 2010s till the 2014s. Out of that, we extract a lot of data to train the system to recognize good combinations. So we say, what are the compounds that you've seen? So for example, here it's seen coffee machine. So that means coffee machine is a good term. So that's a training signal for it, right? To be able to learn to distinguish them, we give it a lot of good examples and bad examples. The bad examples we create ourselves automatically by saying, we have coffee machine, let's just randomly replace machine with something else, for example, mouse, and then say that's a bad example. Now you can imagine that sometimes you actually arrive with good examples doing that, but in general, these are bad examples. Now we have training signal, we can train our system to be able to distinguish good from bad examples. And when we have this system, we then predict new ideas. And how do we do that? We have our coffee machine. We know what are the similar words to coffee and to machine. So we can say, well, if you have a coffee machine, we know that coffee and tea are very similar. Why not come up with a tea machine? Yeah, now that's not a very creative example, as you see from this, but I show you some examples that came out of our system. So what we done then with this evaluation set is we said, now all of the terms that are in here that we haven't seen before are all the new terms. Can our system predict these new terms without having seen them at all before? Now here are some example outputs. So in the red, you see all the things that our system came up with. These are things it's never seen before. And it just put things together based on the knowledge, the patterns that it's seen, and also based on the representations of the words that he has seen in the previous, the data from the previous timestamps, and then coming up with new ideas. In the blue circle or the blue oval here, you see everything that was found in the evaluation set. So these are all the new terms that appear after the 2014 that we want our system to predict. Now you see in the middle things that our system came up with that are also found in the evaluation set. So these are good ones, right? Because they were found and it never seen them before, but it kind of predicted these. An example is vaccination law, for example. It came up with vaccination law because it's seen all kinds of other types of law, which were also related to things that are similar to vaccination. I'm sorry, I don't have the source for how it came up with this idea. There's infection outbreak, there's authentication method, there's verification code, all things that are indeed new terms for after the 2015 that the system created. Now there are also some which are, I think, interesting to look at. These are terms that the system predicted, which were not found in our test set of 2015 or 2015 to 2019. But some of those are perfectly fine, like Riesling sauce, cheeseburger spread. I don't think these are wrong. I think they even exist, and they just didn't happen to be found in this corpus that we specified as our test set. Healthcare burden, hashish store, I think they're all pretty fine. Also Kevlar jacket is something that really exists. Some others are a little bit more doubtful, like brain sculpting, for example, or a knee-length glove, which is weird, yeah, or a light-emitting lamp, which sounds very redundant. Then there's the melting cloud and a heron tooth, and I don't think herons have teeth. The porky dog, what do you think of when you hear the porky dog? And the mucus defect, I think, is pretty fine. But then I looked at some pictures on Google image search to see if, what would they come up with when I type in these words that our system came up with. And brain sculpting, yeah, you can see it as such a thing, right? Or maybe look at it metaphorically. Brain sculpting for business. Brain fitness is fast, easy, and effective. Results are immediate and lasting. So that was quite funny. And yeah, the melting cloud actually also inspired somebody, although it's maybe a metaphor, but to create this t-shirt. So yeah, if you look at all these examples, we thought, there's something nice about these new ideas that it comes up with. And since at Idiap we have the ICC, which is the International Create Challenge. Every year we organize this event where from 9 days you can go from an idea or a technological idea to a kind of business or first prototype. And we, together with, I led a team with all kinds of students that I knew from before, some industry partners, and we came up with a system based on the results I just showed you. And the idea for us was like, you know, couldn't we help with business innovation with this tool? Because it's so hard to be all the time creative nowadays. You have to be really fast. There's all this pressure from competition, right? You want to be first with your new idea, but it's very hard to be creative under time pressure. So, you know, when people have to brainstorm, they often sit there in the groups and like, yeah, I don't know what to say, I have no ideas. So why don't we come up with a tool that can help people to think out of the box? Just by giving them ideas, they can start thinking and discussing. And that was our idea, because no human can do this. Look at all internal data, social media content, trends, and all of that, predict trends for the future. So we said we should use AI to do that, because for humans, that would just be far too much. So we did the same thing as before, except that we said, let's have also scientific articles for the medical domain if we have a medical partner, social media data to see what are the trending things for example, a food and beverage company that wants to know what are the next biscuits that somebody would like to buy. Company internal data, what has been discussed before. And we also thought we needed an interface, because right now, as I've shown you, it gives you a lot of nice terms, but they're all over the place. Some have relationships with law, others have relationships with maybe beverages or the textile, all kinds of different industries. So we need to make sure that people can focus on a specific topic. And we won the competition with that. I forgot to say that. So that was quite a nice outcome of that. But we haven't really made it to the market yet with it. We're still in the phase of discussing with industry partners. The last thing I wanted to show is that nice thing is that I just heard this weekend that that I have a project that was accepted by the SNSF, which is about creative systems. And here I want to go from just these combinations of words to something more structured. For example, for scientific inventions, you can't just put words together. You need more fine-grained and more complex new ideas. And we also want to look at cross-domain and cross-lingual models. So to lead into this discussion, and this is one of the last slides of my presentation, yes, I discussed computational creativity. It's a young but expanding field, and there's quite some attention from the general public. I've shown you just an example of a system, the system that we generated that creates new ideas and concepts. And I've worked on this as an application for a business innovation tool at the ICC last summer. And then, yeah, the questions are, what are the legal implications? Actually, when I presented my innovator tool to the jury, there were some questions about copyright. People were asking me, so what, what if this thing comes up with a new big invention? Who owns it? And yeah, to lead us into discussion, I've put some things together also based on some readings that I did from your field actually about computational creativity. There are certain elements that are important. I think on the one hand, there's data. We have our system. We have the system builders, the people like me that are behind these systems. And then we have people that bought systems that, could be my potential clients, right? That are the system owners then. And for each of these, I have some questions while I was, looking at this, and maybe this could lead to some interesting discussions with you, because I don't know much about that. So one thing about data. So at some point, I wanted to use social media data, and I thought, maybe somebody in one comment said some interesting concept. Now, it's very hard for a company in the food and beverage industry, for example, to find that particular example of a very good idea, because there's so much data. But our AI system could do that. He could go through all the things that maybe are only uttered once by a person, put these all in a list, and then look at each of these and weigh them and say, but this one is promising because I've seen combinations like this before, plus it's a trending topic, let me propose that to the company. And the company could create a new product. Now, how is that related to the person that came up with the idea? I mean, by uttering it in social media, maybe they weren't aware of the fact that there would be an AI system that could grab it and catch it and give it to a company, and then it became a big idea, right? So how do we deal with that? Like that there's the social media data aspect. About the system, there's this, when I read outside of my domain and also from companies, there's always this general wow effect of, AI, what they can do, and these neural networks come up with new ideas by themselves out of their own. But if you really look at it, it's quite predictable, because what these neural networks are very good at doing is mimicking. So they're very good at seeing lots of data that comes from us humans and mimicking us. And I think this is what creates this wow effect, that we're like, wow, it just sounds just like me, which is in a way great. But how much originality is there, and how much should originality play a role when we talk about ownership and copyright and all these things that you know much more about than I do? So yeah, what's the role of originality? Then about the system builders, I also, because people often say nowadays these machine learning methods have changed from before, where there was a lot of influence from the builders of the machines. There was, we had to think of rules, for example, in a very long time ago, it was us coming up with rules of how a system should work. After that, we had machine learning, where we still had to think a lot about what are the features that should figure in these models. Nowadays, models are so good at finding their own features that it seems almost like we don't do anything. But that's of course not true. Otherwise, I wouldn't be so busy, right? So we still have to carefully choose our architectures and choose the methods and choose the data that we're using. So we're, in a way, we're also part of this whole creativity output, right? We're not just, it's not just the machine that does it all. And then the last thing I had is about the system owners, because I created a system, this innovator system, and I imagine I sold it. I made it available for a company that is in the creating new biscuits, and I say, here's my tool, you can use it. Now, how can I prevent them from? How can I limit for what they can use it? Because the tool is a general purpose tool. It can create new ideas for anything. But how can I tell the company, right, I don't want you to now use this tool and find something very interesting for the electronic domain and sell it to somebody else? So how can we delimit that? So yeah, just some of my thoughts. So thanks a lot for your attention. I didn't check the time. I'm glad you said that we were not pressed for time, because I hope we can have some discussions now, and I'll leave the floor to you, the commentators.
Thank you very much, Lonneke. That was fascinating, and we've learned about new words, porky dog, or like new concepts with which I was not necessarily familiar. Perhaps before we shall turn to Andres Guadamuz, who will be the first commentator, are there any questions from the audience that you may want to ask in order to perhaps obtain clarification? We can still do it later on, but just wanted to offer the opportunity to intervene now, either, of course, by raising your hands or speaking up, or by putting that on the chat, which doesn't seem to be the case. So perhaps we can turn now to Andres Guadamuz for the comments on Lonneke's presentation.
Thanks. Thanks very much. That was fascinating. And one of the things that I found fascinating is that it's always really nice to hear from people who know about artificial intelligence and have been working on the field, as opposed to us who have been sort of sniping from the sides, on the sidelines, talking about some of the legal issues, sometimes understanding a little bit what is going behind. But it's always fascinating to me, at least for me. I learned quite a lot, and I had made some notes initially, and I just got so inspired that there are some very interesting legal issues here, and you posed a lot of questions. So I was inspired to sort of put together a couple of slides to sort of start discussing that from a legal perspective, and hopefully we can continue that. So I was going to have a very boring 10-minute show of notes, but I think that this is a very good opportunity, perhaps, to have a few of a discussion of some of the legal issues. So I'm going to try and share something, and I'm hoping that this is going to work. And at some point here, All right. I'm hoping this is going to show. You should see now, right now, a blank screen. That's on purpose. And I'm hoping, okay. Now, you mentioned and something that I found extremely interesting in your presentation was the concept of data hunger, that all of the systems require quite a lot of data. And I just had seen this shared by someone today, how data can be deceiving. So, for example, we have these two people who are born in exactly the same year, they are the same gender, they were both raised in the UK, they both lived, married twice, lived in a castle, and are wealthy and famous. And if we are training a system with just 2 data points, we have serious problems. So this goes back to a very interesting set of legal questions on what is the ownership of data. To make a long story short, and very, very short, I'm just going to go through this quickly. Data has no ownership as such. And the reason for this is because data is often the way it is collected automatically, and therefore copyright doesn't work that well with automated collection, and that is one of the first things. Generally speaking, there are other ways of getting around this. You can have contractual elements when you can you're acquiring data contractually, or sometimes you may be able to acquire some data that is in the public domain, but generally speaking, data is not protected by intellectual property. There is protection of databases itself, which is an area that I'm not even going to remotely talk about because that's very complicated. But there is a potential to protect the database itself, but not the data as such. Other things like pictures and other data points may have some type of protection. But for people who are feeding the systems like you, who are creating the system and trying to get all this data, you need a way of doing this that is legal. So one of the ways in which it can be done is that you're using data that is not protected by copyright. So it's only in the public domain. Or if it is protected by copyright, you could be trying to use an exception. So the UK, for example, was the first country that passed an exception to copyright to allow text and data mining. I'm not going to read this. It's mostly for non-commercial uses. You already have to have lawful access to the work, and you have to provide sufficient acknowledgement, etc., etc. But it's a system that is already in existence and has inspired a European level protection. So we have now, in the very recent Digital Single Market Directive, 2 articles that are present in that directive. Again, I'm not going to spend any time reading them, but we have now 2 articles at the European level that allow text and data mining for research institutions, particularly for cultural heritage institutions, and also a much broader one that allows commercial uses, but more importantly, copyright owners can say that they opt out from the system. They can say they are actually not participating. So this is sort of the environment of data ownership and exceptions and limitations. And now in the US, we have a system that also, since after Authors Guild, actually, sorry, I butchered quite a lot of slides from different presentations. There is a system for protection in the US that is fair use. So if you are actually doing text and data mining for artificial intelligence purposes, you are on the right side of the law. At least there is a very strong decision from the US Supreme Court. You also mentioned Davos, and that was very, very interesting. It's here our friend Dr. Steven Thaler. I really like this photograph because he looks like a Bond villain. He looks like he's about to say, yes, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die, or something like that. He only likes a cat. Now, it's a fascinating system because he created this artificial intelligence, he trained it, and the artificial intelligence has been posted as the inventor of several patents. He has single-handedly moved the area of AI law decades because he started applying everywhere, and now he has a successful application. This has been successful in Australia, and now we have a decision from the Australian court that allows this invention, this machine that Davos, to be named as the inventor. It's fascinating. It's the first artificial intelligence inventor in the world, and it has been rejected in the UK, in the US, and at the European patent level. So that is fascinating area. I'm going to go very, very briefly. Also, dealing with the copyright areas specifically, I don't know if this will make any sense to people who are technologists, but the way I've been thinking about the copyright aspect from a creativity perspective has been to think about artificial intelligence in two ways. One is called transformative AI, or what I refer to as transformative AI. Is artificial intelligence that transforms something that already exists. So this is an artist, Daniel Ambrosi, who takes photographs and passes them through Deep Dream. And the result is something like this. I actually really like it. It's very beautiful, at least for me. And this, from a copyright perspective, it could be interesting because you actually have input from a person, from a human being that is actually making decisions. I've chosen parts of that photograph to actually pass it through a system. Usually you have to select the filter, etc., etc. So there's a more interesting discussion here. And also, this is what I don't think may have copyright, which is what I consider generative AI and things that are using GANs that are completely generated. Even though they may look like real cats, none of the cats here exists. So this is one of my favorite websites. It's a system that has been taught how to make a cat, but none of these exist. So is this a system that actually can be protected by copyright? The system itself, yes, but the outputs, I don't think so. I don't think that there is actually output here. There can be completely autonomously generated. So I don't know if that is going to be the case. From a copyright perspective, what is happening, we have three scenarios. Only humans can create copyright. So everything that you see that is created by artificial intelligence and is potentially protected by copyright would be in the public domain. We have the proposal to have some sui generis rights akin to database rights, where there is need for investment, and maybe allow machines to create copyright, artificial intelligence rights. The rights go to the programmer, to the person that made the work possible. That is actually the case in the UK. And thanks for the fascinating talk. Hopefully that brings them all together and it's in enough time. But again, thanks for the fascinating chat. I hope that brings everything together.
Thank you very much, Andres. Lonneke, would you like perhaps to react to certain of the aspects which have been mentioned?
Yeah, it's nice to see that, you know, certain things that I had to look up, like Davos, for example. I knew it was important, but yeah, for me, it's quite difficult to understand all the implications for law in that, right? So it's nice that you made that more clearly for me. Yeah, so about the data being in the public domain. So for the social media data, that's public domain, right? So the person who mentions a very great idea and it's being picked up by my tool because it can process lots of data and it can see that this is an interesting idea. This person has no rights, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. The actual posts themselves, so individual posts have copyright, but the actual accumulation of all the data, I don't think that it has. And if we're thinking about ideas that would potentially be subject to patentability, then the fact that it's in the social media, it makes it not patentable. Yeah, I hope that's clear.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's interesting, but in a way I would somehow find it a bit unfair that people that just participate in social media aren't aware. I mean, I think with the recent thing that you always have to click, are you allow cookies? Yeah, it doesn't help much either, but at least it makes you think once. Maybe there should also be something where people are aware that, you know, the ideas that they formulate can be picked up by these AIs and then be brought to the market or something like that. So yeah, but that's good to know. The other thing about the human in the loop. So you were saying like when the artist, I think I also liked the result, by the way. You're saying that there's an artist who's still there being inside the loop because he chooses the particular pictures, plus there's a filter that they apply. So I think the same way about my system. I would never say that my system creates new ideas. It only creates it in collaboration with people, because it just puts things together that it thinks make sense to put together. But it is the human that has to look at those, evaluate those, and see, you know, from all their experience that they have, whether this is going to work or not. So I really think that also there, even not in the process of creating it in my case, right? The process of creating is done fully automatically, but then in the different things that it comes up with, the human still has to filter what is a promising idea, and the system cannot do that. So I think that there's also a human in the loop. Yeah, then the Google Books. I saw Google Books and I've used it also. I didn't really understand what you said about the Google Books corpus.
Yeah, it's so in Europe we have the exception to copyright. Now it's in the UK, for example, but also in the digital single market directives, in which if you are data mining, you have an exception. With Google Books, it's a different system because the Americans have something that's called fair use, and Google was sued because they were data mining books and they were scanning books automatically from libraries. They got sued for copyright infringement, and the courts in the US decided that they were not infringing copyright. So now there is an exception to copyright contained in fair use, in which if you are training a machine, it's likely that you're not infringing copyright. It's now known as the Google Books fair use defense.
Okay.
Yeah. So
yeah,
particularly I wanted to specify this in the US because it's so much data is now being created in the US. So yeah, the good thing is for researchers like you who are feeding the hungry machines all of the data, is that you can do this most of the time free without fear that someone is going to sue you.
Okay.
So that was what I wanted to
know.
convey. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Yes.
I hope
for
that's
us, the
clear
Google.
now.
Yes. But the Google Books corpus is quite a difficult corpus for us because I always thought that was for copyright issues. It's presented to us in 5 grams. So we only get to see 5 words and we cannot really from there see what the full sentence was, which for us is not so great because we would like to take more of the context into account. But I guess that has to do with the copyright issue, right? So you cannot construct the book out of the corpus.
Yeah, part of their defense is that they're not showing the entire book. So they are not infringing copyright in the feeding of the books, which is in what the copyright owners are saying. Okay, you're copying all of our books. They are in a machine somewhere, so you're infringing our copyright. Google say this is for non-commercial uses. We're doing it for the good of humanity, etc., etc. And we're not going to show the entire book, as you were saying. So the good thing is that if you had access to a library, you would be able to get all of the books yourself. But of course, that's very expensive. But yeah, the good news is that for researchers that are willing to feed the machines, you won't be infringing copyright, you won't get sued, and you won't have to defend yourself for 10 years like Google had to do. This was a very long case. It it went through all the stages. So yeah, only Google can defend itself in those situations. So I hope that's clear.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
I think there are more of these questions, but I don't think that is the moment to ask these. I think I will maybe at some point write to you and ask you.
No,
now
I'll be more than
this.
happy. Yeah, more than happy to keep in touch.
That's very, very nice to have this kind of insight from your field, which I don't have. Yeah, thank you.
So
thank you
very much. I see that, Andres, you have avoided to express your position on the various scenarios as to whether humans shall remain the only one creating copyrighted works. Perhaps we can keep that on hold for the final discussion after we turn to Ana, but I think would be interesting also to, perhaps for all of us, and specifically for our speaker and our commentators, to try to think about whether what you've presented, Lonneke, perhaps can shed new light on the way how we look at creativity from an IP perspective and a corporate perspective more specifically. But let's keep that on hold and now turn to Ana Andrijevic, who is our second commentator for the session today. Ana.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for this presentation. It's always great to have the possibility to interact with people from the tech part, because you would be surprised by what is being said in the doctrine in general and how general the statements are. And that I'm really looking forward to be able to discuss about it with you next month when I will join Idiap. So when I was listening to you, I was remembering a story I heard a few years ago, and then I will show you a few pictures and talk about specific points. But just wanted to share that with you because you were talking about social media and the kind of bias we can have. So we often, when we talk about AI and the biases, we think about racism, we think about issues with gender, etc. But there's another thing, and this is a discussion I had with a photograph, because when I started my PhD on the impact of AI on copyright law, I discussed with a few artists, including a photographer who told me that if we think about an AI which captures, for instance, all the data on social media, will that really represent the real life these people have? And she said, well, of course not. So if you want to really have a pure inspiration of all the things that are part of creativity in general, you would have to have more information than that, and not just the nice information that you can see and selected information that you can see on social media, for instance. So I was thinking about that when you were talking about bias. And also another thing I was thinking about is when we talk about the results of, when a human being creates an art form, whether it is a painting or a text, etc., the result is really a choice. It's not just something, it's supposed to be really a choice, at least. It's not just something that has been created a little bit randomly and then it just creates output. So I see here a strong difference between the choices made, the creative choices made by the artist, which are really reflected in the output, and the output is, decided as it is, versus what we can see with AI, for instance. So that would be an interesting conversation to have with you too. But I just wanted to share with you, so a few slides also to talk about and to tackle a little bit more about maybe the legal questions. So I hope you can see. So I just wanted to start with a quote. I remember this article I saw on the MIT Technology Review on the internet, so you have the reference if you're interested in that. So it was a text by Isaac Asimov, who were talking, who titled this text, "How Do People Get New Ideas?" And I think it's an interesting text you could look at, because he really has interesting takes on that. And one of the interesting quote I wanted to underline here is the one that you can see in red. So one way of investigating the problem is to consider the great ideas of the past and see just how they were generated. Unfortunately, the method of generation is never clear, even to the generators themselves. So here, I think it's interesting to, create a parallel also with the AI system, because we don't really know as well what the process is, but there are things like that are very dissimilar, and at the same time you can always create connections between AI systems whether it is by the randomness of the act or how randomly you would connect ideas to finally create something, things like that. So I just wanted to share that with you because I thought it was an interesting read. On a more academic perspective, so this report was published recently by the Oxford Internet Institute, which is interesting because it was much more done from a, let's say, sociological perspective. And they had the opportunity to talk to a lot of artists. So I know your field is much more connected to natural language processing, and I'll go back to that. But I just wanted to create a parallel here between what I've seen, a concrete example of also a legal matter, and then I'll go back to natural language processing. So here, what is interesting is that a lot of people know this example. It's extremely famous also because it was the first AI painting ever sold at also at such a high price, which was $500,000 back in November 2018. So everybody knows about that. It was created by a Parisian collective. But what people know a little bit less about the process of creation is that the code was not created by Obvious Art. It was created by another guy whose name is Robbie Barrett. And that's his quote just on the right. He was interviewed by the team at the Oxford Internet Institute. And what is interesting is that he really strongly is, against the idea that also the fantasy that AI would be, would have some sort of, let's say, that in his idea, really AI is collaborating with human beings is what I want to say. So in his idea, he really wanted to use AI as a tool. And it's also an argument we see all the time in the legal doctrine in general is that AI is a tool. We shouldn't even try to go any further than that. And I think it's interesting to have the perspective of artists here. So you can check all these different quotes made by artists. And here you can see this statement. The more I learned about it, the more I noticed artists who are more in the public eye, who don't fully understand the technology, writing curatorial statements and text saying this is artificial consciousness and mystifying it on purpose for the art audience. And this is typically some things that they don't really like, even though these people name themselves AI artists. So they completely accept the fact that they use AI, but in their mind, they really use AI solely and purely for as a tool. But what about the law? And this is one aspect that is interesting to me. So we could talk about lots of different aspects of copyright, but I think this one was really, really interesting to me also because it maybe shows, and this is something I wanted to ask you, do people in technology really understand the limitations of copyright? Are they interested in that? Do they want just to avoid the question and try just to take what is, the most efficient, and they're sure they won't have any issue with the database they're using? I think it's interesting, and that's why it's really interesting to talk with you, because it really gives us a new perspective on what is really important for you in the technology. Because if we just do it separately, we tend to be a little bit more, again, create generalities and things like that that are not really interesting to me, I think. So here, how 3 French students use borrowed code to put the first AI portrait in Christie's. So this is a reference once again to this portrait. And this code, once again, was Robbie Barrett's code. And the link I put here is the GitHub conversation, which is also in this article, where you can see the people from Obvious Art talking to Robbie Barrett and asking Robbie Barrett to actually adapt his code for them, so they can then use it and then create a work of art, which has been sold $500,000 in the end. And that was interesting to me. And then I digged a little bit more. I decided to try to go a little bit deeper, because on GitHub, you also have legal aspects. And I wanted to see what was the license on. So what was the right to use this copyrighted code? And here, as you can see, actually, the license that was on this code that was precisely used by Obvious Art was changed in 2019. So I don't know when, so considering that the painting was sold back in November 2018, and then this has been changed in 2019. Now you can see that extra in red, you can see no outputs of the pre-trained models may be sold or used for profit otherwise. And this is interesting to me because once again, yeah, you can have the law on your side if you don't want people to use your code. So I think it's interesting also to try to really go on the tech field and see how people deal actually with the legal aspects. And this is where lawyers and people from the technology part can really discuss. So this was interesting to me, and I'll try to find more examples. But the reason why I was talking about an example once again, which is directly extracted from the GANs world and not the NLP world, is because I wanted to show you that. So now let's go back to the natural language processing world. And here is an interesting example, of a very recent example. I was trying to find some interesting things to share with you. Well, once again, a young doctorate PhD candidate at this university in Sydney decided to create a text generator, which looks like that, and which was funny to me because it's written down 0 stories remaining today. So as you can see, you can put teams together and then it will generate a new story. And I thought it was funny that it was limited. And then here, once again, to go back a little bit to the introduction, just to show that here again, he really believes that it's a way of helping artists. So in this interview, he really says how he conceived the whole thing was really to give possibility for artists who maybe have an issue with the blank slate, to try to get rid of that and just to give them a possibility to start new stories with very few words and then just to start again. But once again, it's really perceived as a help. And I would be interested in having your opinion on that in general. Is it just a help? Is it not? Do you want to see more of that as something really autonomous and not, more and more autonomous? So yeah, I just want to share that with you. So we're seeing that not only with text generated, but also Netflix is using it. So that's an article from 2021 where Netflix asked an AI to write a horror movie. And the result is apparently quite funny, actually. So I haven't watched it, but I will do it. I just wanted to share that with you because I thought it was an interesting story. And to go back to the NLP, so what I think is interesting and what I remember from the readings I've done in the tech part is that NLP is really complicated because when we put that in opposition with images, for instance, you have other rules that apply, which are from grammar, from syntax and things like that, that you don't have with images. So it makes it all the more complicated. And I thought about the examples you showed us with these couples of words put together. The difference I see between text and images here, which is to me quite important, is that all these words that are created in the end won't necessarily be admitted anywhere, in the sense that if you create a random image, nobody will tell you that it doesn't mean anything. It can be an abstract form, an abstract painting, an abstract picture. But if you do that with words, it doesn't work because you have people who will tell you that it doesn't mean anything and who won't understand at all the language to use. So you would potentially just be a new language. And I was thinking, if you try just for fun to put these new AI words in a GPT-3, for instance, to generate new AI images, that would be even more interesting to see what an AI understands from an AI generated text and how it creates an AI image from that. I think that would be glorious. So language is the next great frontier in AI. This is a title from Forbes. I found another article from Forbes, which said a wave of billion-dollar language AI startup is coming. And this is my last question for you, is that, is creativity just a way finally to get to something more important, more tangible, more, I don't know, is creativity just one type of training to use these NLP models to do something else, something more, something different? So this is because apparently, and according to this article, creativity is not even mentioned in that. So they just mentioned, startups that use NLP. So you see that certain models actually have been created by models that have been created to create new text have been also working on other models, or maybe the same, I don't know, you tell me if you can use the same model to do other things. So this is typically something I'm interested in. So these are my comments. I hope it was interesting. Thank you so much for this presentation. I'm really looking forward to hearing back from you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anna. Lonneke, would you like to react?
Yes, a lot of interesting topics. I'm glad you're coming to Idiap because I cannot get into all of these now in this slot. But yeah, I'm very happy that you're coming to us to discuss this more in details. So yeah, which one shall I pick to talk about? Yeah, the AI feeding into the other AI, we tried that. That didn't work very well. So yeah, somehow then it doesn't produce the kind of images that make sense. It's often amidst the more creative elements. So I think we added something. We had a monkey ring which came out of our system, and we didn't find that we didn't know really what to do with it, but we thought it could be monkeys holding each other's hands in a ring, or it could be a ring that a monkey wears, or it could be a ring in the shape of a monkey, right? All of these things. But what the system gave us when we said monkey ring was just a monkey, not even a ring-tailed monkey. So I thought, yeah, I was quite disappointed by that actually. So yeah, that didn't work so well. What else did you say? That about that NLP is so hard because of all the intricacies of language. Yes, indeed. I mean, we have syntax, we have all these rules that we need to stick to have well-formed output. Now, I, of course, was quite clever in choosing compounds because there's no grammar there. As soon as I had to produce a sentence, it would be more difficult. I can just put things together. And also I chose the English language because if I had to do it for French, it would already be harder because I have to choose which preposition to put between the two words, right? And for this, I need semantic knowledge. So language is hard. I think language is also hard because there's a lot of reasoning behind it. And it's especially reasoning that these systems that we currently have quite a lot of trouble with. They are good at mimicking us and generating output that sounds like they are knowing what they're saying. But when you try to pose them questions, or you kind of probe these models for specific knowledge that they learned by, yeah, you have to come up with specific test sets to test this. You can see that the knowledge behind it and their ability to reason is quite limited. So that is something that's very hard in language. What else did you ask about the AI startups and the fact that they're seeing that this is something where a lot of money will go to? I think this is not so much for creativity. I think that there's a lot of money spent on AI startups that have nothing to do with creativity. There's, for example, interest in sentiment analysis. Companies want to know, are people talking about my company in a positive or negative way? Lots of things where there's not really creativity involved. I do hear more and more that people think we're missing creativity. For example, if you look at chatbots, dialogue systems, people like creative elements. And if a system comes up with some creative thing that it utters, people are intrigued and want to go on talking. Whereas if it's boring, it repeats itself. Repetition is very boring. So yeah, in language generation, we want to see some variation, some diversity. And I think this is where this is important. What else was there? From the very beginning, you started talking about bias also in images. And indeed, I think that if you look at social media, this is really not the normal life. Everybody looks better and does more interesting things than normal life, right? So these are also biases indeed that we see, which are not so often discussed. People talk more about gender bias and these, and I think that is, yeah, I've actually already talked to people in the field about that. We're always talking about bias with respect to specific things like gender and cultural background, for example, but not so much bias in general. And I think that is a very interesting point that you're making, and it's definitely something we should be putting some research into. The other thing about do I want my system to be autonomous, as you were showing, I feel that from the literature from people outside the field, the non-technological people, they are much more into this idea of AI doing things by its own and being intelligent and the autonomous part of the AI system. Whereas I think we never, we are kind of modest as developers. We're not thinking that our tools are that good that they can be used on their own. We always think of them being used by humans. I know that when I was at the University of Malta before, there's a system, it's called the De Bono Institute for Creative Thinking or something. And these people go to companies and then they create these workshops where they let people think out of the box. And I read from the methods that they use that, for example, they have the method where they open a dictionary, take a pen and point at a word and then start brainstorming. And when I heard that, I thought, wow, I can do better than that, right? I can at least find a word that is related to what these people are interested in. If you are in a company that creates, I don't know, that builds houses, you don't want to have something about cookies, right? Yeah, so you want something relevant. So I thought there's a lot of things that I can do to help people, to support people in their ways of creative thinking. And I think that was always my aim. Of course, I want my systems to be as good as possible so that I don't waste people's time, that they don't come up with ideas that make no sense or that lead people in no direction. So I want them to be as good as possible. And maybe because of that, we kind of aim for autonomous because we wanted to help people as much as possible. But yeah, I think that most of the people working in technology are looking at it from that perspective. So I probably missed some points, but
it's totally fine. It's perfect. Thank you so much for your answers. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these interactions, and now the opportunity to open up the discussion and to invite the audience to join if they want, either in writing on the chat or by raising their hand. I would perhaps take the opportunity just to briefly react, if I may. Also, I was trying to think about language. Oh, there's a question by Yvon Pantef. You have the floor. Perhaps you can turn on your camera. Perfect, great.
Yes, thank you. It's not so much a question, maybe a concern to express about one of the three scenarios that Mr. Guadamuz discussed, namely the last one that affords copyright protection to works created by artificial intelligence. My concern with this scenario would be that copyright was designed for humans who can create original works, however, not at the same pace as machines can do. Machines can be way more prolific. They can create, if I've been informed correctly, they can create thousands of work a minute. And if each and every one of those is afforded copyright for decades, probably, we'll have to figure it out. Then what we also have to do is adapt not just the copyright protection afforded to these works, but also probably the exceptions. So we don't have to think about infringing copyright with basically every move we do. So this would be my concern with the third scenario. And I absolutely understand that companies who invest in these technologies also want to benefit from them and not just share them with the rest of the world immediately. So I understand that some kind of protection is required, and probably a sui generis right, like we have for the database protection would be more plausible, and it would allow us to a bit more flexible about the content of the protection we afford. For example, the number of years works should be protected for. Thank you.
Yes, I'll briefly answer that. I agree. It is problematic, but I don't think that probably if we adopt the position where some works generated by AI could have protection, I don't think that every single work would be protected. And we said that's one of the reasons why I was making the distinction between having some human interaction or intervention at some point. That I think is very important. If you're going to have a system in which you can exercise intellectual creation, as the law says, then there is going to be originality, therefore there is protection. The fact that there was a machine intervening at some point is not as important. So that is probably one of the, we could create a filter so we don't have millions and millions of very low quality works. And that filter could be some intellectual creation, some human intervention. At the moment, the UK and other countries have legislation that allows, or at least in principle allows, the protection of works generated by a computer, where the authorship goes to the person and make the arrangements necessary for the work to come into being. So that could be the programmer or even sometimes a user. So it's already in place. I agree that probably the system that we need is some form of investment based, like the database rights, some sui generis work. The only concern I have, for example, for not having any sort of protection is that we can turn it the other way around, and human authors are going to be competing with millions and millions and millions of free works that are in the public domain. And that is a very scary prospect. So potentially for some humans, it would be okay. Yes, you can still produce quality, but you're competing against things that are free. So nobody's ever going to pay for anything again. So that is something that I think that we need to solve. And probably I agree, potentially a sui generis right would work. But also the third option with a filter is the one I ask. Going back to the question by Jacques initially, I think that my own preferred solution would be a filtered third option in which the human is the filter. There has to be a human intervention. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Thank you very much. Perhaps
Thank
a reaction from Lonneke and Ana about that, because of course it's a fundamental question. Also from a non-legal perspective, I think this is also the essence of the AITPT sessions, to try to see whether there are common grounds, hopefully, between the different approaches. Lonneke?
Yeah, so yeah, very interesting question. And all of a sudden I was thinking of, for example, logos. I can imagine I could create, well, I'm not in the vision domain, but some of my colleagues could easily create a system that generates millions of logos just by looking at logos that exist and then, you know, putting them somewhere. And then afterwards we can claim for any new logo that comes up saying like, oh, but look, we've already came up with that. Look how similar it is to what we've already created. And that seems very problematic because it's so cheap for us to come up with such a thing. And then it's so easy to find similarities with other people. So yes, we need some filter. I think it's problematic to immediately award copyrights. And I was thinking maybe is copyright, I have no idea about this, but is that something you pay for? Or, I mean, that would be a way to filter, right? If you let people choose from the machine what they think are valuable ones, pay for it. At least then you get to something where it's not all for free. The problem is the free thing. I think we should avoid having too much for free.
Yeah, copyright is free in most countries. It flows from the pen to the paper, as some people say. It's very beautifully put. As soon as you create an original work, it's created, so it is free. In some countries, there is a registration requirement if you are going to enforce your copyright. So in the US, that's a good example. If you want to sue someone for copyright infringement, you have to register it and there is a fee. So that could also maybe serve as a filter. Maybe, yeah, bring back registrations. Big controversy maybe, but yeah.
Yes.
Ivan?
Ivan,
if I may intervene again,
yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to share something related to what you last said. I was listening to an interview recently. It's on the podcast IP Fridays, and it was with an artist who had created probably by now millions of very short samples of music, and had put them under Creative Commons license, so as to enable defendants in copyright infringement cases to use this as a defense strategy. So this would be like the opposite of what we just discussed, and maybe also provide a way for people to survive a new age in which everything around us is somehow in copyright, protected by copyright.
Thank you very much for the illustration. Anna, would you like to react to?
I think I will give the chance to the last person maybe to ask the question. I think it would be interesting to have more questions maybe from the floor, if possible.
Is there any additional input or question to be made here? So it doesn't seem to be the case. So would you like to seize the opportunity, Anna, just to?
Yeah, I was thinking about the registration process. Didn't WIPO try something like that and it didn't work much? So maybe not sure it's
yeah,
it's the right way to go.
Yeah, they've tried voluntary registration. Yeah. It didn't work, but I think that they market it well. I think that there's nowadays there's stomach for some form of registration system. It would solve a few things that we are seeing, particularly with the internet. I think that they're having discussions, I think, and potentially it could be something that could be looked at. Yeah, registration doesn't have a good history in general, but I can see a revisiting of this completely. Yeah, it's controversial. Going back perhaps to Ivan's example, I know about this experiment. Pamela Samuelson, one of the foremost experts in copyright law in the US, has decreed that that music is not worth the bits it's written in from a copyright perspective. She says that, and I trust her opinion, these works are not protected by copyright. That was from a US perspective, because this is a US project. She said this has whatever. So they created like 7 billion songs or something, very, very low level. Yeah, I've written about this before. Very interesting example.
Thanks very much. Perhaps, given that we have just a few minutes left, briefly react and make 2 short comments. The first one, I was struck by what you said and what you presented, Lonneke, in terms of also challenges raised by language. And I was thinking, you were saying that you focused on English. I was thinking about German. Of course, German is a different story, because you can basically, as I guess everyone knows, combine words in a single word, so which makes it, I would assume, much more challenging to see what you can derive from that. That would be one comment, and perhaps a question or invitation for action. And the other one is, that goes back to what you also said, Lonneke, in terms of the example of logos. And I was thinking that perhaps it might be relevant, and maybe that's also a question to you, whether this has been considered, whether you have looked at brands and trademarks as a source of language creativity. Because you can be also very creative, and brands and companies are using trademark law in order to develop new words. And of course, I cannot refrain from taking the example, the Swiss example of Velcro, which is, as I guess most of you know, a combination of velour crochet, so velvet and hook. And I was thinking perhaps that could be interesting, but I guess might be quite challenging to see whether trademark registries might be used as a source of looking and trying to identify language creativity. I'm not too sure whether that might be of use. Of course, the advantage is that this is public information, basically, and as you know, the registries can be looked at relatively easily, but at the same time, it might be challenging to identify which trademarks, which brands might be considered as being like new words, creative words, knowing that in essence, the challenge that is that they might be creative, but then fall somehow in the public domain because they would be used or misused by the public, which was the case of Velcro to some extent. So it's, again, a complex perspective, but I was wondering whether trademark registries and brands information could perhaps also be taken into account.
Great idea. I really like that last thing that you're saying. I was always thinking of patents because I thought, you know, that is where inventions are mentioned, but this is, it's a really great idea. And I went to one of the AI talks, AI tech talks previously, where there were some people from Belgium, I think, you collaborate with, and they were more looking at the visual domain, I think. But I mean, yes, indeed, I didn't think about brands and names for brands. And yeah, I think it's a really nice idea. I would definitely want to take this further with you. Maybe we can do something together there. Really, really nice. Yes, there's so much creativity there also. And also, if you look at the text that are used, I can see on websites for a particular brand, right? What kind of emotion do you want to bring across? And then, yeah, very nice, I think. So thanks for this idea. The other thing about German, yes, German is hard because it's not so much that they put it in one word. I mean, I can easily remove the spaces, but it's not just that, because they have all these linking elements. And I've worked on the opposite thing. If you have the long compound, how do you split it up? For German, we've done that and it works really well. But yeah, gluing things together, we haven't done. So yeah, so we've just for now stuck to English, but you're right that we should look also into the other languages a bit more. Yeah, thanks for these comments. Can I ask a question? Because yeah, maybe.
Please do. Please do.
Yeah, I was wondering. So these paintings that have been sold and that were created by AI systems, I guess that the people that bought these things were aware of the fact that these were AIs behind it. I wonder, what does the law say about that? Like, can I create a system automatically and then sell it to somebody saying that I did it myself? Or is that against law? Do I need to be honest about this or not? And how is that?
Andres, Anna, any thoughts?
Do you think about are you thinking about that several things actually?
Yeah.
There's the code on one side, plus there are the images or the paintings on the other side, the pictures of the paintings, things like that. So lots of things are all in all together. When you want to create a painting like that, the thing that was interesting to me in the case I mentioned was really just the aspect of the code, and especially the fact that they asked the first person, the first programmer to adapt the code so they can use it. I thought this was interesting, but at the same time, I don't know what was the license at the time. So he changed it. He changed it afterwards in 2019, but I don't know what it was at the time. So I don't know how maybe they had, an arrangement between them. It's not very clear actually how they discussed about that. I would be very interested in knowing a bit more. I think I will contact the first programmer just to know more, because I'm interested once again in knowing how it works. And also when it comes to the use of database, I saw several times in tech books in AI, how many times people just give advice to each other, such as make sure you use pictures that are in the public domain so you don't have any issue when you train your model and things like that. So it's quite interesting to see the connection between the two. But once again, there are several things that are protected. So then it's a case by case assessment, if you want.
Yeah, as to the obligation of disclosing whether or not this has been created by human, there is no such obligation, but it could come up at some point. I saw a discussion at some point that maybe there could be some claims on unjustified enrichment, which is an area of law. We have in the UK that someone is claiming to have created something that they didn't create. There is no such thing as false attribution with a machine. But no, so far you have no requirement to disclose how you created it. You just produce an image, and the machine is not going to say that they created it. They're not going to come out and tell on you. So no, it's a really interesting question.
It feels unfair, right? Because
it does feel unfair.
It's this thing of cheapness again, right? It's so cheap for a machine to come up with new paintings, whereas for a human it takes so long. So when you pay for such a painting in your head, you have this idea of somebody worked on this, and that's I didn't know that. Wow.
No, there's, as I was saying, there is no obligation. It may come out at some point that someone says, "Oh, this guy is generating all these images with a machine." Sometimes people are very open that they are using AI systems because it adds a little bit of futuristic cachet. I don't know if that's
maybe I've actually paid more because it was AI. It was the first one, right?
Yes, exactly. So
but
there is a certain element of that, but under other circumstances, I can see this becoming an issue completely.
Yes.
I don't know. We'll have to wait for case law to.
Which will come.
It's funny,
I'm sure.
How you have to evolve all the time with law, with what's happening, right? That's very interesting. I can imagine.
Well, we can make opinions, and we make opinions all the time, but sometimes we just wait for the case law to start flying.
So I think it's time for us to wrap up and to thank Lonneke from the Plas for this excellent presentation, as well as our two commentators, Andres Guadamuz and Ana Andrijevic. It's been a fascinating discussion. Obviously, as we see, there's still a lot to be discussed, and also waiting for potential cases coming from different jurisdictions with different approaches. Anyway, a fascinating discussion, and we very much look forward to continuing it together in perhaps in a face-to-face format, hopefully soon. So many thanks to all of you for your participation. Unless there is a final urgent question, I would suggest that we shall stop here, and perhaps with the speaker and commentators, we can just briefly meet up in the breakout room. So many thanks to all of you, and wishing you a very pleasant evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.